It's a Tuesday morning in paradise, but something is terrifyingly wrong. Where thousands of sun-seekers should be spreading towels across sugar-white sand, there's nothing but emptiness. Lifeguard towers stand like abandoned sentinels, their red flags whipping in the wind, not warnings of rough surf, but barriers to entry. Federal patrol vehicles crawl along what was once America's playground, their lights cutting through an eerie silence that has never existed in Florida's history. From Miami's South Beach to the Panhandle's Emerald Coast, every single beach in the Sunshine State has been sealed off by federal mandate. The iconic pier at Clearwater sits vacant. The boardwalks of Daytona stretch empty into the distance. Even the exclusive stretches of Naples, where million-dollar homes kiss the shoreline, are ghostly quiet. This isn't a hurricane evacuation. This isn't a red tide event. This is something unprecedented, something that has ripped through Florida's very identity like a fault line through bedrock. Because beneath the postcard-perfect waters that define this state, beneath the waves where dolphins play and manatees graze, something massive has broken. The federal government isn't just recommending people stay away, they're enforcing it. Armed Coast Guard vessels patrol offshore while state troopers man roadblocks at every beach access point. The message is clear and chilling. The ocean itself has become a threat. What could possibly force the closure of every beach in a state where tourism generates over $100 billion annually? What discovery could be so catastrophic that it demands shutting down Florida's economic lifeline without warning? The answer lies hidden beneath millions of tons of seawater in a fracture so massive it's challenging everything scientists thought they knew about the seafloor beneath the Sunshine State. This isn't just a crack in the earth, it's a crack in Florida's future. It started with Hurricane Elena, a late-season storm that carved its way across the Gulf of Mexico with unusual fury. As the winds died and the waters calmed, marine geologists from the University of Miami launched their routine post-hurricane survey. These missions are standard, mapping how storms reshape the seafloor, documenting erosion patterns, updating navigational charts. But Dr. Sarah Chen, leading the research vessel Cousteau, wasn't prepared for what her sonar revealed. At first, we thought it was a data error, Chen would later tell emergency officials. The reading showed what looked like a canyon, where our charts indicated solid seafloor. We ran the scan 3 times, thinking our equipment was malfunctioning. The sonar painted a picture that defied explanation, a jagged fracture stretching across the continental shelf, beginning roughly 12 miles off the coast of Tampa Bay and extending southward like a massive zipper torn open in the earth. Unlike the thin fault lines that occasionally appear after earthquakes, this was a gaping wound in the seafloor, in some places over 50 feet wide. The crack wasn't just impressive in its breadth. Its depth readings sent chills through the research team. Their instruments couldn't find the bottom. Where solid limestone should have provided a foundation, there was simply void. Within hours, additional research vessels converged on the site. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration deployed their most advanced deep-sea rovers. The images they transmitted back were unlike anything in their databases. Walls of exposed limestone dropping into darkness, sediment clouds swirling like underwater dust storms, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the crack was still actively widening. By dawn the next day, NOAA had escalated the discovery to FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the White House Situation Room. By noon, the decision was made. Every beach in Florida would be closed indefinitely. The crack wasn't just a geological curiosity. It was a potential catastrophe that could reshape the entire southeastern coastline. The speed of the government response revealed the gravity of what lay beneath Florida's waters. This wasn't bureaucratic caution. This was fear. To understand why federal officials reacted with such alarm, you need to grasp what makes Florida's geological foundation uniquely vulnerable. Unlike the rocky coastlines of Maine or California, Florida sits atop a foundation of limestone, essentially compressed ancient coral reefs that formed when the entire peninsula was underwater millions of years ago. Limestone is porous, riddled with underground rivers and caverns that create Florida's famous springs and sinkholes. On land, these voids occasionally collapse, swallowing homes and highways. But underwater, the stakes are exponentially higher. Think of Florida's seafloor as Swiss cheese, explains Dr. James Rodriguez, a structural geologist at Florida State University. It's not a question of if these voids will fail, it's when. What we're seeing off the coast isn't just erosion, it's structural failure on a scale we've never documented. The crack's formation likely began long before Hurricane Elena exposed it. Decades of rising sea levels, increasingly powerful storms, and the constant pressure of ocean currents gradually weakened the limestone foundation. Underground rivers, invisible to surface observers, may have been carving larger and larger voids beneath the seafloor. What makes this discovery particularly alarming is the absence of any seismic activity. Major geological fractures typically announce themselves with earthquakes, giving scientists and officials time to prepare. But Florida's crack appeared with no warning, suggesting that similar failures could occur anywhere along the state's coast without advance notice. The potential consequences read like a disaster movie script. If the crack continues to widen, it could trigger underwater landslides that would displace massive volumes of seawater. The resulting tsunami wouldn't need to be ocean-spanning to devastate Florida's flat coastline. Even a 10-foot surge could reach miles inland in some areas. More troubling still, the crack's location places it directly in the path of the Gulf Stream, the powerful current that moderates climate along the entire eastern seaboard. If the fracture disrupts or diverts this current, the ripple effects could alter weather patterns from Florida to Nova Scotia. International experts have arrived to study the phenomenon, bringing comparisons to Iceland's volcanic fissures and Japan's undersea earthquakes. But those events occurred in tectonically active regions where such disruptions, while devastating, weren't entirely unexpected. Florida's crack represents something potentially more dangerous, catastrophic geological failure in a supposedly stable region. The race is now on to understand whether this is an isolated incident or the first sign of wider instability beneath one of America's most populated coastlines. For Maria Santos, who has operated a beachside restaurant in Clearwater for 23 years, the closure feels like a death sentence. "My whole life is tied to this beach," she says, staring at the empty sand where her outdoor seating once welcomed hundreds of tourists daily. "Without the beach, I'm not just losing my business, I'm losing my identity." Santos represents thousands of Floridians whose livelihoods depend entirely on coastal tourism. From the boutique hotels of Key West to the fishing charters of Destin, the sudden closure has triggered an economic earthquake that matches the geological one offshore. Airlines have already begun waiving change fees for passengers with Florida beach destinations, acknowledging what industry insiders won't say publicly. Many of those bookings simply aren't coming back. The Marriott chain reports that their Gulf Coast properties are operating at less than 15% capacity, forcing temporary layoffs of housekeeping and restaurant staff. But the impact extends far beyond tourism economics. For 3 generations, the Rodriguez family has operated fishing boats out of Panama City. "The government says we can't fish in our own waters," says Captain Miguel Rodriguez, whose grandfather started the business in the 1950s. "They're treating the ocean like it's contaminated, but there's nothing wrong with the water. The problem is 40 feet down, where nobody ever goes anyway." The psychological toll may prove even more significant than the economic one. Beaches aren't just Florida's economic engine. They're the state's communal living room, weekend gatherings, family reunions, first dates, marriage proposals. All the rhythms of Florida life revolve around access to sand and surf. Jennifer Walsh, a longtime Tampa resident, describes the closure's emotional impact. "It's like someone has fenced off part of your soul. I take my morning jogs on the beach. My kids learn to swim in these waters. Without the beach, Florida doesn't feel like home anymore." The closure has also displaced the elaborate wedding industry that flourishes along Florida's coast. Beach ceremonies generate over $4 billion annually for the state. Couples who planned their dream weddings on the sand are now scrambling for alternatives, with many simply canceling their Florida celebrations entirely. Perhaps most heartbreaking are the multi-generational families who gather annually for beach reunions. The Martineau family, spanning 4 generations, has met at the same Sanibel Island rental house for 18 consecutive years. "We have toddlers who know these beaches better than their own backyards," says family matriarch Dorothy Martineau. "How do you explain to a 4-year-old that the ocean is suddenly off limits?" The underwater crack isn't just threatening human communities. It's unleashing chaos on marine ecosystems that have evolved over millennia. The massive sediment displacement caused by the fracture has created underwater dust storms that are suffocating coral reefs and seagrass beds throughout the region. Dr. Amanda Foster, a marine biologist with the Florida Aquarium, has been monitoring the ecological fallout through remote sensing equipment. "We're seeing coral bleaching events that have nothing to do with temperature," she reports. "The sediment clouds are blocking sunlight that's essential for coral survival. Reefs that survived decades of warming are dying in a matter of weeks. The disruption extends throughout the food chain. Seagrass meadows, the foundation of Florida's marine ecosystem and critical habitat for manatees, are being buried under layers of displaced sediment. Fish populations that depend on these underwater grasslands for breeding and feeding are already showing signs of stress migration. Most concerning are the disrupted migration patterns of sea turtles, which use magnetic fields and current patterns to navigate during their epic ocean journeys. The crack's interference with normal current flows has left turtle populations confused and vulnerable during peak nesting season. We're seeing female loggerheads swimming in circles offshore, Foster explains. Their internal compass systems evolved over millions of years to read specific environmental cues. When those cues change suddenly, it's like erasing a roadmap that's been in use since the dinosaurs. The timing couldn't be worse. Florida's waters are entering the peak season for marine life reproduction, from sea turtle nesting to fish spawning. The crack's emergence during this critical window threatens to disrupt an entire generation of marine species. Environmental scientists warn that the crack could accelerate other climate-related threats facing Florida's coast. Rising sea levels, increasingly powerful hurricanes, and warming waters were already pushing the state's barrier islands and coastal ecosystems toward a tipping point. The sudden geological instability may have pushed them over the edge. We're looking at a cascade failure, Foster concludes. The crack isn't just one more stressor, it's the trigger that could collapse systems that were barely holding on. The closure of Florida's beaches is sending shockwaves far beyond state borders, disrupting global tourism patterns and raising uncomfortable questions about coastal stability worldwide. The Caribbean Tourism Organization held an emergency conference within 48 hours of the closure announcement, as member nations scrambled to absorb the flood of displaced travelers seeking alternative beach destinations. We're seeing booking surges that our infrastructure simply cannot handle, reports Lucia Martinez, tourism director for the Bahamas. Hotels that were booked at 90% capacity are now turning away desperate travelers willing to pay premium rates for any available room. The international scientific community has mobilized with unprecedented speed. Research vessels from the European Union, Japan, and Australia are converging on Florida's waters, bringing advanced deep-sea exploration technology that surpasses anything in the U.S. fleet. The European Space Agency has redirected satellite monitoring capabilities to track the crack's development from orbit. National security implications are equally troubling. MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa and Naval Air Station Key West serve as critical strategic assets for the United States. While neither base faces immediate evacuation, Pentagon officials are privately reassessing the wisdom of maintaining major military installations on a coastline that may be fundamentally unstable. Commercial shipping routes are already adjusting course. The Port of Tampa, the largest port in Florida, handles over $15 billion in trade annually. Ships are now required to take longer routes around the affected area, adding days to delivery schedules and driving up costs for everything from agricultural exports to manufactured goods. Insurance markets worldwide are frantically recalculating coastal property risks. Lloyd's of London has suspended new policies for Florida beachfront properties, pending comprehensive geological reassessment. The implications extend to coastal cities globally. If Florida's limestone foundation can fail catastrophically without warning, what about other supposedly stable coastlines built on similar geological foundations? International climate scientists are watching Florida's crisis with particular concern. The crack's potential to disrupt the Gulf Stream could trigger climate changes, affecting Europe's weather patterns, Arctic ice stability, and global ocean circulation. What began as a regional emergency is rapidly becoming a planetary concern. Unlike hurricanes, which announce their arrival with satellite imagery and evacuation orders, the underwater crack represents something more psychologically destabilizing, an invisible threat that could strike without warning. This uncertainty is taking a measurable toll on Florida residents' mental health. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, a trauma psychologist in Miami, reports a surge in anxiety-related appointments since the beach closures began. People can prepare for storms, but how do you prepare for the ground beneath the ocean to simply disappear? She asks. It's triggering existential anxiety about the stability of the world itself. Social media has amplified both the fear and the fascination. Dramatic sonar images of the crack have gone viral, inspiring everything from apocalyptic memes to conspiracy theories about government cover-ups. Florida crack has generated millions of posts, creating a digital echo chamber where speculation and misinformation spread faster than scientific facts. Some residents have organized beach vigils, gathering as close to the closed shorelines as authorities allow. We're mourning something that's still there, but we can't touch, explains vigil organizer Robert Chen. It's like the beach died, but its body is still visible. The psychological division between coastal and inland Florida residents is becoming increasingly apparent. Residents of landlocked cities like Orlando and Gainesville express sympathy, but struggle to understand the depth of coastal communities' distress. They act like we're overreacting, says Clearwater resident Susan Martinez, but they don't understand that the beach isn't just where we vacation, it's where we live, emotionally and spiritually. Religious communities have offered varying interpretations of the crisis. Some frame it as divine intervention, a warning about humanity's relationship with nature. Others see it as a test of faith in community resilience. Several churches have organized prayer circles specifically focused on the healing of the waters. Perhaps most telling is the emergence of what psychologists term anticipatory grief, mourning the potential loss of a way of life that may never return. Even if the beaches eventually reopen, many residents fear that the sense of safety and permanence that defined coastal Florida life has been permanently shattered. The crack has forced Florida to confront uncomfortable truths about its development patterns and environmental vulnerability that the state has avoided for decades. Urban planners and environmental scientists are using the crisis as a catalyst for conversations about sustainable coastal development that were previously dismissed as economic threats. We've built a $1 trillion economy on the assumption that Florida's coast is permanent and stable, observes Dr. Michael Thompson, an environmental policy expert at the University of Florida. This crack is forcing us to acknowledge that assumption was always false. Insurance companies are demanding comprehensive geological surveys before issuing new policies, effectively freezing the coastal real estate market. Property values in some beachfront communities have dropped by 30% in the week since the closure, triggering a cascade of underwater mortgages and potential foreclosures. The construction industry faces a complete recalibration of building codes and practices. New developments along the coast are being required to incorporate geological resilience standards that didn't exist before the crack's discovery. Some projects have been abandoned entirely as developers conclude that coastal construction may simply be too risky. Environmental activists, long marginalized in Florida's growth-oriented political culture, suddenly find themselves at the center of policy discussions. Groups that spent decades warning about overdevelopment and climate vulnerability are now being consulted by the same officials who previously dismissed their concerns. It's tragic that it took a geological crisis to get serious attention for environmental protection, notes Rachel Stevens of the Florida Conservation Coalition. But if we can channel this crisis into sustainable policy changes, maybe something positive can emerge from this disaster. The crack has also sparked broader philosophical discussions about humanity's relationship with natural systems. Artists, writers, and religious leaders are framing the fissure as both a literal rupture and a metaphor for the disconnection between human development and natural processes. Urban planner Maria Vasquez proposes a radical reimagining of Florida's coastal future. Maybe this is an opportunity to step back from the edge, literally and figuratively. Instead of fighting to rebuild exactly what we had, we could create something more sustainable and resilient. As sunset approaches another day in the new Florida reality, the beaches remain empty, where families should be gathering for evening strolls and surfers should be catching last waves. There is only the rhythmic sound of waves meeting sand with no one to witness their ancient dance. The lifeguard towers stand as monuments to an interrupted way of life, their empty chairs facing an ocean that has suddenly become alien. Coast Guard vessels continue their patrols, their lights cutting through the dusk like mechanical fireflies guarding a forbidden shore. Scientists still don't know if the crack will stabilize, expand, or trigger additional fractures along Florida's coast. The monitoring equipment deployed across the seafloor transmits data around the clock, but the Earth keeps its secrets. Each day brings new questions. Will the crack reach the surface? Could similar fissures open elsewhere? When, if ever, will it be safe to return to the water? The economic calculations grow more sobering by the day. Every week, the beaches remain closed costs. Florida an estimated $2 billion in lost tourism revenue. But the psychological cost may prove even greater, the loss of identity for a state that has always defined itself by its relationship with the sea. For now, Florida waits. The sunrise still paints the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, but there are no early morning joggers to witness it. The waves still roll ashore with their eternal rhythm, but the sand remains unmarked by footprints. Paradise persists, but at a distance, beautiful, beckoning, and forbidden. The crack beneath Florida's waters represents more than geological instability. It's a fissure in the assumption that natural systems will remain constant, that the ground beneath our feet, or in this case, beneath our seas, can be trusted to stay solid. It's a reminder that the planet we inhabit is still actively changing, still capable of surprises that can reshape entire regions in a matter of days. Florida's beaches will likely reopen someday. The crack may stabilize, the monitoring systems may determine acceptable risk levels, and the barriers will eventually come down. But the Sunshine State that emerges from this crisis will be different, more aware of its vulnerability, more respectful of the dynamic forces that shape its coastline, and perhaps more appreciative of the temporary nature of paradise itself. Until then, the beaches wait in silence, and Florida holds its breath.